Osio Nagad Ugadosh Davodon. Hello everyone, I'm Feather Smith. I'm the Cherokee Nation Ethnobiology Manager. Today we are at the Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden, a native plant site where we'll be talking about Cherokee heirloom crops and the history behind the Cherokee Nation seed bank. I have a degree in Fish and Wildlife Biology from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, which is also where I grew up. My field and my degree emphasis was really more on wildlife biology, and so I did not expect to work in plants. I really didn't expect to work in botany. In 2014, one of my former committee members with the Miss Cherokee program, as I was a Miss Cherokee in 2008 and 2009, actually contacted me because she is part of our Cherokee Nation Medicine Keepers group, and had said that there was a position coming open in our, what was actually the Administration Support Department at the time, but it had started out as our Natural Resources Department, and that the position was going to be looking for a Cherokee cultural biologist. She knew that was in my field, and she knew that I had a background in Cherokee history and culture, and so she asked me to contact Pat Gwynn, who was really the primary person who helped get all of this program started. I contacted Pat. We talked over a course of about 6 to 8 months before I finally got hired on into this position in January of 2015. Initially I was hired on as the Cherokee Nation cultural biologist, and I kept that position until 2021 when I became the Cherokee Nation ethnobiology manager. As the Cherokee Nation cultural biologist, it was important that I had a Cherokee Nation or a background in Cherokee culture, history, language, that I understood the importance and the culture around the preservation of Cherokee heirloom crops, and then also the culture around even growing native plants in our setting, and why we would have been growing those plants and sort of what the emphasis was on that. It's also important when working in this to kind of understand the taboos of Cherokee culture, which was very simple for me since I grew up in Cherokee culture. It was sort of a hard niche to fill in that they were looking for somebody who had both the biological degree, a biological background, but then also understood the Cherokee culture as well, and had a strong upbringing in that. And so it really kind of worked out perfectly for me, even though I knew almost nothing at the time. I've had to learn almost everything on the job since I've been out here. I started working with Cherokee Nation in 2007. I initially worked at the Cherokee Heritage Center as a tour guide in the Dilligwa Village, before then moving into this position in 2015. So our Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden native plant site sits just east of the Cherokee Nation complex, and on this site we grow the vast majority of the heirloom crops that supply the Cherokee Nation seed bank. We also grow well over 100 different native plants on site that were important to Cherokees for either medicine, food, or utilitarian purposes. We have about 16 varieties, well actually we have slightly more than that, about 16 to 18 varieties of Cherokee heirloom crops. At one time Cherokees were known for growing the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And so behind me is actually our corn, which is the first part that would have been growing in that three sisters method. We would start out by planting the corn. You would have to let it get about 6 inches to about 1 foot tall before we would then plant the beans. The beans are going to grow up the corn, so the corn gives the beans a structure to grow upon, and then the beans will also fix nitrogen in the soil, which corn likes to consume a lot of nitrogen, so they grow well together. As the beans crawl up the stalk and they wrap around that stalk, they also give a little bit more support to that stalk so it's less likely to fall over. The last part of that three sisters method would be our squash, or it could also be pumpkins, and in some cases even gourds. They would be planted a few feet away from the corn and the beans, but the squash, which is also a vine, will spread out over the ground, and as it does, it makes really large leaves, which do a great job of shading out the ground, which is going to help with moisture retention, and it's going to cut down on the amount of weeds that are coming through. We grow 4 varieties of corns, 4 varieties of pole beans, a variety of squash, and a variety of Cherokee pumpkins, and then we have 3 varieties of heirloom gourds, along with also growing native tobacco. All of these seeds are grown out here for the purpose of genetic preservation. So each year when we're growing these seeds, we want to make sure that we only grow the very, very best of our previous stock. And then we also only keep the very, very best of the stock that we will grow this year. So that way our genetics are going to be in tip-top shape. And then out of everything that we'll have left over, because we'll only need a very small percentage of the seeds that we grow, we are then able to use what we have left over and give that back to Cherokee citizens for free. Those can be either the Cherokee Nation citizens, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, or the United Katua Band of Cherokees, which are all three the federal recognized tribes of Cherokee Indians. We allow people to submit their request for seeds every year, usually in February, and then we will mail those seeds out to them for free. And each person is allowed to request 2 varieties of seeds, but they can continue to request each year until eventually they could have all the varieties of seeds. Basically, the work out here is really, it's having to grow the plants, make sure that we keep them watered, pest control, weed removal, and we spend all winter long when we're not growing in the summer preparing the dirt and growing the dirt that we're going to need for the following summer when we go to start growing our seeds again. No, we have never been able to make the Three Sisters method work here in Oklahoma, and remember that initially Cherokees came from the southeastern part of the United States. And so we actually spread across parts of the Carolinas, the Virginias, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia. And the climate there is different. That is in the eastern deciduous forest, and we kind of still sit on the fringes of the eastern deciduous forest here in Oklahoma. So our climate is somewhat similar, but we all know that Oklahoma is hotter. On top of that, if we actually look at historical temperature differences, we can look at what the the highest and lowest temperatures that were being experienced in the southeastern homelands and here in Oklahoma during the time of removal. We have a slide that shows this, and in the slide what we notice is that the hottest that the southeast was getting at that time was at the very low 90s, and the hottest that Oklahoma was getting in July during that time was about 97 degrees. And obviously that's not true today. We have regularly hit well over 100 degrees this year. We're definitely at least 10 degrees above that for our hottest temperatures in July. And so the temperatures are very different here. We can see that climate shift happened for us, not just going from the southeast to here, but has also happened to us since we've been here in Indian Territory. So with all of that said, our corn likes very warm temperatures, and it typically does very well in Oklahoma heat. We used to actually plant our corn in April. Over the years, as the climate here in Oklahoma is starting to change a bit, we got to the point where we were planting corn in May. And for the last few years, we have not been able to get our corn germinating and growing until early to late June. This year, we started planting and got most of our corn in mid-June, and then had to fill in some of our rows in late June, which is far later than we would normally like to grow. But corn usually does well in warmer temperatures, and so it can handle that. Our beans, on the other hand, do everything at slightly lower temperatures. They still need 4-inch soil temperature, 4-inch depth soil temperatures to be at 65 degrees. But they do not do any sort of pollinating once the temperatures get above the high 80s. So once we get into the low 90s, the beans will continue to be green and healthy plants, but they will quit pollinating and we won't actually get any beans on those. And so in most cases, we actually have to plant our beans earlier in the year. They do not like high Oklahoma heats, and so it's kind of a struggle to keep them alive during these really hot temperatures. And so they have to be planted earlier in the year. And in that Three Sisters method, you have to plant your corn first, and then the beans get planted second, because the beans have to have something to grow up, and the corn has to be able to support those vines. And our beans are being planted, anywhere from a week to a month after our beans are getting planted. Most of the time with our beans, we get a small spring crop. If this year it didn't work out, and we get the majority of our crop in the fall. And by the time that we will get all of our fall crop, I will probably still be, we hope that I'll be harvesting beans all the way up until our first frost, at which point the frost will kill them. But our corn will actually start dying back, and we will start harvesting all the corn in the next few weeks. So our beans are going to be kept alive past that point, which is why the Three Sisters method just doesn't work here in Oklahoma for us. We currently grow 4 varieties of corns. We have the Cherokee White Eagle, which is a dent corn. It is by far our oldest variety of corn. So many of our stories actually talk about how seeds were carried across the Trail of Tears when we were forced from the southeastern parts of the United States, our original homelands, into Indian Territory, or what is present-day Oklahoma. Some of the stories actually talk about how they had taken the seeds that they knew were so important to them and had sewn them into pockets within the skirts of the women to make sure that those seeds successfully made it across the Trail of Tears and into Indian Territory. Cherokee White Eagle is one of the varieties of seeds that we do know for sure were carried along the Trail of Tears. When we started the seed bank program, we kind of had a tough time finding several of the seeds, so it wasn't always possible to find all of that still here being grown, but we do know that they were carried across. And again, that is probably our oldest variety of seed. It is our most unique variety of seed. Our other 3 corn varieties of seeds are flower corns. We grow the Cherokee colored flower corn, which is a multicolored, a Cherokee yellow flower corn, and a Cherokee white flower corn. All of our corns are going to be best ground into cornmeal. The white flour is very commonly made into hominy. They're probably the best for eating. The Cherokee White Eagle corn can technically be consumed, but it's actually more of a ceremonial corn. It is what would have been used for our green corn ceremonies, and it is what is even still used in our stomp dances, our stomp grounds today, and our more religious aspects, which is used for ceremonies. So in the early 2000s, I can't remember the exact year, we actually had a council member who had gone and had a question about placing a Cherokee seed into the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which is located in Norway. A little bit about Svalbard is that they actually take seeds from countries all over the world, and they preserve those seeds, and in some cases do some research on those seeds as well. But the countries are able to put their seeds into that seed vault and know that they'll be secure there, so that if anything should ever happen, any sort of natural disasters, they can go back and get seeds at a later point. The Svalbard Seed Bank, Seed Vault is supposed to be, freeze-proof and flood-proof, and so it's supposed to be able to even survive, hopefully, any sort of major disasters that could happen. And so it really just acts as a way of ensuring that everybody's going to have a backup for their seeds. Our council member at the time, recognizing that, of course, Cherokee Nation is a sovereign nation, thought that our nation should be represented as well. But when they got to asking the question about a particular variety of seed, we already doubted whether or not that seed was Cherokee, and so they asked us to go ahead and start finding what Cherokee seeds we did have. And what we found was that at the time, there were no seeds within the Cherokee Nation itself. And so then they turned around and said, okay, our new project at this point is we're going to quit worrying about the seed vault. We want to find Cherokee Nation heirloom seeds, and we want to ensure that they're being preserved. So they started talking with everybody that they could get with, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians who still lives in the Cherokee homelands. They talked with Carl Barnes, who was a leading corn expert on all heirloom varieties of corn. And so they just kind of got into contact with different people trying to find some seeds. And out of that, we were able to find our 4 varieties of corn, our 4 varieties of beans, a couple of the gourds, and then also the squash. And eventually, we've only recently added the pumpkins. But what we also found was that once we found these varieties of seeds, nobody in the world, that even though we knew that these were Cherokee seeds, they weren't being grown for preservation. And when we're not growing seeds for the idea of preserving what that seed was truly supposed to be, over time those seeds wind up being lost through cross-pollination issues or just bad years. They start losing their characteristics, and you wind up with something else entirely. And so that became the #1 job at that point, was to make sure that our seeds at that point were being rounded up and then being grown for genetic preservation. Out of that, every year once we started growing, we went ahead and we would put back our very best seeds each year for our genetics to ensure that those genetics were going to continue. We actually keep our genetic stock in 2 different areas. And that just ensures that if something happens, if we happen to have a freezer breakdown or something, then we have our own backup stock. And then all of the excess seeds that we have are then given back through the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank for free to Cherokee citizens. The Svalbard Seed Vault did eventually, due to an article that Pat Gwynn had done several years ago, had somehow gotten a hold of that article, read that article, and then contacted us in 2018 about having the Cherokee Nation represented in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So in 2019, we were able to get 9 varieties of our heirloom crops into Svalbard's the Global Seed Vault. We were the first Native American tribe, and I think at the time are still the only Native American tribe represented in that seed vault.